Next, we have Celia Emil Haynes from UC Berkeley and Parvena Abispor from Lewis and Clark College. And they'll be chatting to you all about reaching the qualitative researcher, lessons from a collaborative workshop with 5 liberal arts colleges. So I'm going to turn that over to you all, and we'll do our wrap up afterwards.
Thank you. I just want to make sure Parvin is on this call. I don't see her as a panelist. Oh, there you are. Okay, perfect. Let me get started with the slides. Can you all see that okay?
Yes, thank you. Oh, but we're seeing your presenter view with your notes.
Okay.
If you want to
Let
swap
me see
screen.
how I do that. Oh, I know what's happening. I have an external cord. Okay. There we go.
Beautiful, thank you.
Hi, my name is Parvene Abispor. I'm the Science and Data Services Librarian at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. I'm happy to be here today presenting with Celia Emil Haynes, the Qualitative Data Librarian at the University of California, Berkeley. We're excited to share our experience working together to organize a workshop on ethnographic data curation. Just a quick outline for our talk today. I'm going to share a bit about the background of our project and some of the particulars of the liberal arts college setting. Celia will share her work developing the curriculum for this workshop. We'll touch a bit on some feedback and the workshop outcomes. And finally, we're happy and excited to point you to our modules, which are available for download and reuse. So, 6 years ago, with support from the Mellon Foundation, 5 small liberal arts colleges in the Pacific Northwest began collaborating to develop data management training. And I just want to take one moment to say thanks for having us here. We're really excited to be here talking with this community of data librarians about our work and sharing ideas. This slide has a map showing the exact locations of our 5 schools in Oregon and Washington. At that time, our schools were in the early stages of developing research data management services, and we sought to pool our resources, scattered knowledge, and a collective will towards this goal. Over the following 2 summers, we organized workshops that brought together faculty, student researchers, and librarians from across our 5 schools to learn together about RDM practices. For these workshops, we employed a generic curriculum adapted from the Data One and New England Data Curation curricular modules. Feedback from these workshops was positive, but some faculty indicated that a disciplinary approach may prove more effective. And so in 2018, we renewed our collaboration through an Institute of Museum and Library Services Sparks grant with the goal of developing RDM training to speak to the particular needs of 2 disciplines, chemistry and ethnography. On this slide, you can find the hashtag for our grant and for this presentation. To accomplish this goal, we sought librarians with domain expertise to help us tailor our generic RDM modules to the disciplinary needs of these fields. To craft modules for ethnographic researchers, I reached out to Celia, whom I had met briefly at a conference a few years before and whom I knew to have a strong background in both ethnographic research and qualitative data management. Furthermore, I knew that she was familiar with some of the particulars of the liberal arts context through a previous position she'd held. I'll take just a minute to touch on some of those particulars. So faculty at liberal arts colleges are expected to practice a particularly time-intensive style of teaching, while nonetheless pursuing active research agendas alongside. Students are the primary research assistants to these faculty, and they have a particularly high turnover rate. At best, they might be involved in a project for 2 to 3 years with breaks for study abroad or other engagements. However, our faculty are held to the same standards for data curation when they apply for grants, and we have the same imperatives to train our graduating students in data management competencies of the modern research landscape. That said, one opportunity we see is that the close-knit environment of the liberal arts college setting, forged by personal relationships between librarians, faculty, and students, lends itself to the development, could lend itself, we postulated, might lend itself to the development of research data management training with an eye ultimately for integration into the undergraduate curriculum. This image is a building at the Lewis and Clark College campus. So we did organize a day and a half long workshop that took place a year ago in the fall of 2019. Librarians at each of the 5 schools put out a call to their communities, inviting faculty, students, and librarians who work with ethnographic data to take part. We brought together 12 faculty, 6 students, and 8 librarians. They represented fields across the social sciences broadly conceived. This photo shows workshop participants working together. We'll turn it over to Celia now to speak about her work developing the workshop curriculum.
Thank you, Parvana. So one of the things we did before we brought people in for the workshop was we did several pre-surveys to assess people's interests and needs, because we knew that we were working with people from such diverse disciplines. And these are a sample of some of the data types that they said they were bringing to us, reflected on this slide. So hours of recorded interviews, which become interview transcripts, photos, videos, evidence online that comes and goes, which is a great description of some data, archival data, and field notes or observations at events. And this is obviously a tremendous range of data, with each with its own concerns for privacy, confidentiality, and how you would share it. So what we did with that knowledge in hand was that we tried to adjust the standard research data management curriculum specifically to the needs of qualitative researchers. And one of those big issues is identification, that people can easily be identified with complex and overlapping data types. And often researchers are working in small communities where even heavily anonymized data could be recognized by people from that community. Furthermore, some data types such as audiovisual and photos are inherently hard to anonymize. And a history of data misuse and control of information leaves many qualitative researchers and the communities they study very fearful for themselves and reluctant to share. So that presents another challenge with the sort of sharing ethos of typical research data management. Before the workshop, we assessed people's feelings about sharing by asking whether they would consider sharing their ethnographic data with others. And the response from faculty was very hesitant. They said, my field notes have personal reactions. I'm concerned people could be identified. We didn't get consent to archive the data, or simply, I want to be in charge of framing and interpreting the data. Maybe I'm willing to learn about management of data, but I don't actually want to share my data with anyone else. And the undergraduate students, in contrast, had a much more open idea and perhaps a little bit less experience with the complexities of data. So they said, of course I would share because that's how research works. Or of course I would share because it would expose underrepresented voices. In response to these concerns, we focused our workshop heavily on building trust with the participants. We assigned pre-readings by ethnographers who have wrestled with these concerns so that people could see that many of the fears that they have are already being discussed in the research data management community. And we allowed people to get out all of their fears in an anti-sharing discussion before the pro-sharing discussion. So we tried to get that all out into the open and then shift the conversation to the ways in which there might still be benefits from ethnographic data sharing. We also allowed researchers to make their own decisions and set their own timing about how they would handle their data, trying to help them maintain a sense of control, but also move towards more standardization. This is a small element of a rubric from the California Digital Library called the Support Your Data rubric, and it was something that we handed out ahead of time. On our website, which we will share, there's a link to the full rubric, but it's just a way of moving from ad hoc to occasional to active to consistent data management. And it allows researchers to assess, where am I right now? I share the results of my research, but generally I don't share the underlying data. And where might I move to? I might move to sharing data when required or regularly sharing data. And we ask people to do that kind of self-assessment and then shift to where they think they could step to in the next year or two.
5 minutes.
Thank you. And the other thing that we did was we specified throughout the curriculum specifically to ethnographic data. And we focused on some elements like confidentiality, informed consent, and data sovereignty that aren't often covered in standard data management curricula. The third thing we did was that we added coding in. So a lot of the participants said they wanted us to teach how to code qualitative texts. That's not typically part of a research data management curriculum, but we said, well, if that's what you're interested in and it gets you to this day-and-a-half-long workshop, we'll teach that. So we kind of added that in. Two specific discussions that we added in were one about permissions, rather than just a yes, no, looking at other levels of permission given by respondents, especially with detailed qualitative research. So whether they're willing to be video or audio recorded, whether they want their story only shared orally, uploaded to the web, shared without restrictions, archived permanently, and whether they want to be named or not, to add a little bit more nuance to people's consent to qualitative research. And related to that, we talked about Indigenous data sovereignty. So the idea that Indigenous communities might have ownership over qualitative research data, and that as researchers, maybe we can't just dispose of it how we want without continued conversation with those communities. On this slide, there are three images. There are traditional knowledge labels, and one of them is of information only meant to be shared within a family. There's two trees that represent information only meant to be shared during a certain season, and an image of two women representing information that's only meant to be shared between women in certain contexts. So this complexifies our typical open access approach to data by specifying more how the data should be used in its origin community. Parvina?
At the end of the workshop, participants were asked to set 3 specific RDM outcomes or intentions. And in this image, you can see one participant's answers. Answers range from improving individual documentation practices to speaking to IT about particular technical solutions, to taking up discussions at departmental meetings or with collaborators, and to generally raise awareness about this issue on campus. Additionally, we did have a component where we had faculty, students, and librarians brainstorm together about ways that this type of curriculum could be integrated into the actual undergraduate curriculum, the existing curriculum. And that did result in the development of 3 distinct RDM lessons, one for an intro level course, one for a methods course, and one for a thesis course. And at Lewis and Clark, this fall, we are working to implement the methods lesson in the SOAN methods course, which will ask sophomore and junior SOAN majors to identify their data types and formats, as well as specify backup plans and speak to the handling of sensitive data for their term projects. We passed out a survey after the workshop, and interestingly, we saw a bit of the same dichotomy, but certainly faculty did seem to increase their awareness of these topics and be ready to engage with them, but nonetheless express some consternation about issues of control, while students, on the other hand, were excited and open generally to these ideas. So some final takeaways and conclusions. We do feel positively that we were able to create a workshop built on trust, and that was largely achieved through the Celia and the domain expertise that she brought to developing this rich curriculum that spoke to these needs, and some of the choices and how the workshop was structured that she described. We also noticed that a workshop is really an event and that it connects people, and faculty were excited to be there talking to faculty from other institutions about these issues and about their work in general. It was also an opportunity for the library to connect with these faculty. Speaking for myself, at Lewis and Clark, my primary work in research data management had been with our science.
1 minute.
Faculty. Thank you. And this was the conversations that started at this workshop have led to ongoing conversations. And not to be underestimated is the opportunity for students to sit alongside their professors as they engage with this information and express their concerns and sort of reconcile their feelings with these new approaches to handling data in their field. And finally, the work towards developing curriculum we're excited about, and was one of the takeaways. So just to close, we want to point you to the modules, the workshop modules, which are available for download and reuse on our website. And finally, we have a few acknowledgements, of course, to the IMLS and the members of our steering teams, the librarians from all 5 schools who participated in this project, and our attendees. We have one slide with references, and thank you very much. We're excited to take your questions.
Thanks, y'all. We have about 4 minutes for questions. So just a reminder, pop them in the Q&A and I can help facilitate. All right, it looks like our first question is from Teresa. They're wondering if you could potentially go back to the slide with the module link, or if you wanted to paste that in the chat, I'm sure that would work as well. And then the second question, can you drop the link to your workshop in the chat? So lots of curious folks wanting to check out your materials, which I don't blame them, they're wonderful. And it looks like another question just came in from Allie. One thing that was discussed yesterday in the IRB talk was the intersection of institutional mandates with researchers' data practices. Did that come up at all in the workshop, and how was that discussion handled?
Yes, I can answer that. So one of the great things about holding this at Lewis and Clark College is that Parvene was able to get their IRB representative to actually come to the workshop and answer questions directly. And that meant that researchers who had concerns could talk directly with an IRB representative and hear their perspective. We also pulled in some text, which you'll see in the modules, in terms of sharing data and getting consent that people could model for their own forms as they go to prepare their next project. And we recommended that people check out the qualitative data repository, who has done a lot on this, as you saw yesterday or the other day.
All right, we've got a few more questions. Next one is, I really enjoyed your presentation. It makes me think a lot about the role of communities in determining how data is not only disseminated, but also stored. How did you engage directly about the role of communities and their autonomy and authority in these processes? Can those communities be included in these conversations beyond the researcher?
I think they should be. And one of the challenges that we faced was that people work in such different communities. So there's a long history and an urgent need to work closely with Indigenous communities in the US when you're conducting research in these communities. And the mistreatment of Indigenous communities by white researchers is part of why Indigenous data sovereignty has become such an important concept. But people also talked about doing research in, say, small Peruvian villages, and the fact that there isn't really a repository or a tribal historic preservation officer in these villages to maintain the data. And so the question is, do you put it in the capital? Like, if you want to put a copy of your data more accessible to local people, which I think is appropriate, when and how do you do that? And that was a conversation that we had. I think it's important for people to talk with people in their communities that they're researching it in as much as possible, but there's often not a single easy answer.
Thank you. We have a few more questions. How was it decided which undergraduate students attended the workshop?
The workshop was open to any undergraduate students that could make it fit into their schedule. Of course, students from the other 5 colleges had to travel to Portland, most of them. And so if they had the ability to come, and we tried to help out with rides, and of course the grant covered their travel costs, they were welcome to come. The students who did come were pretty keen and involved usually in like a thesis project or another sort of in-depth project. But it was great having their voices.
Great. Next question is, do you teach qualitative software through the library?
We do somewhat at my institution, which is a larger state university, but we primarily do it through a methods laboratory for graduate students. I'll do individual consultations as well.
At Lewis and Clark, it's really just by individual consultations. If a student requests, we're happy to get up to speed on whatever they need.
Okay, I'm gonna sneak one last question in here. Have you thought about how to adapt this to a possible virtual event while still building trust and community among participants?
That's a fantastic idea. Of course, one of the limitations of this is the funding for travel, to support travel, and in a way the virtual environment eliminates those costs, and that's really a fantastic idea. Celia, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to say that I recently attended the carpentry's instructor training for library carpentry, and that was a great opportunity to see modeled a very interactive form of workshopping online where people can break out into small groups and type in common windows and bring assignments in and out of a workshop. So that gave me a vision of possibly a good way to lead workshops online, and I definitely could see that being done with this type of material.
Great, well, thanks for answering all of these questions. If you wanted to pop your emails in the chat for any future questions, or again, the materials are available through those links through OSF, which I know your contact information is there too. So folks can reach you with more questions, but thanks again, y'all.